Hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you back to my channel. If you're new, thank you very much for finding me. I grow cold, cool, intermediate orchids here in Melbourne, Australia without a greenhouse. So with no heating, humidifiers, grow lights, etc. Just inside or outside, or they're out of the pool. So if you are growing orchids like that, feel free to hit subscribe. I post every week. A complete amateur stumbling through the path of growing orchids. You should perhaps take anything I say with a grain of salt. But anyway, here we are, and as you might have seen, somewhat of an array of flowering orchids. So today, plant lovers, I just thought, I may have been shopping, so I thought I might just do a little summation of the things I bought and perhaps why I bought them, what they're doing. No care instructions for any of these because I haven't had them long enough, but perhaps in a year's time we can revisit each of them and see how I've gone and if they're still alive. Okay, let's reposition ourselves so technically brilliantly and look at this. It is the most amazing flower. Now, I'm going to lift it up, but I will also take a long shot of it for you so you can see. Look at the length of that flower spike. I don't want to hit the ceiling. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Now that would be, I would say, it's nearly 3 feet, so it's probably about 80 centimeters. That, plant lovers, is a very tall, in fact, 3 very tall flower spikes. Now, you might remember that I made a video about a Laelia anceps that I have, which bloomed for me for the first time. I will link that above and below. And this happens to be a white form of a Laelia. So here in Melbourne, in sunny Australia, it is quite difficult to find plants in bloom, mature specimens that are in bloom. Because there aren't that many shops that sell orchid plants other than, of course, Cymbidiums and Phalaenopsis, as we know, the 2 gateway orchids. Other than that, pretty slim pickings, and there are a few places I go, and one of them, which is a place called Collector's Corner, which I've mentioned before, and in fact made a video about their amazing Christmas Phalaenopsis. It's a nursery here in Melbourne that is specialists in all sorts of rare and unusual plants, but they do have an amazing greenhouse full of orchids, and next to it, sort of a cooler house full of orchids. So a good place to go seasonally because they will often have mature specimens in bloom. All manner of plants, Vandas, Cattleyas, Oncidium types, Cymbidiums, etc., etc. One of the few places you can go with any regularity, I think, in Melbourne to find flowering plants. So I happen to be in the area, which is a complete lie because it's about a 35-minute drive from here. So I happened to find myself in the area, and there were all manner of things in bloom, lots of Cymbidiums because it's Cymbidium time, but there were 3 of these amazing white Laelias. Now the other one that I have is pretty classic sort of magenta-y pink, and then I found another one on Facebook Marketplace which is similar but different colour palettes, different strengths of colour, but I hadn't ever seen a white one, and so here we are. And plant lovers, it has answered one very pressing question for me, which is the length of the flower spike. Now all of the Laelias in the shop that I went to had flower spikes that were this tall, immensely long. So I felt somewhat vindicated by my single bloom on a very long spike that occurred a couple of months ago. So there we are. Anyway, my heart did not rest until I bought this, and in fact I didn't buy it, and then I got home, and as you do, you think, I just don't think my life is complete. So the next day I drove back another 25 minutes there and 25 minutes back just to buy this. I'm now here to tell you though that my Laelia anceps collection, I think, is done unless, someone creates a yellow one or a blue one, which is highly unlikely. But anyway, I have enough. It's a stunning flower, and as you can see, there are sort of striations of magenta right in the lip and an amazing yellow touch in the middle there. So pure white with that hint of magenta and hint of yellow makes it a very, very enchanting flower. So I'm really pleased with this. As you can see, it's quite a large division. It's in a shallow wide pot with medium bark, so it's going to be, I think, quite happy in this pot for some time. It is, of course, a plastic pot. Never mind, I will forgive it. So I think perhaps when it starts to put on significant new growth will be the time for me to repot it. So I don't think that will be next spring, but perhaps the spring after. Anyway, we'll see just how vigorous it is. My other one that I made my video about, quite vigorous, and it's running for the hills, and that really needs to be repotted in spring. So I might make a video about that because it's in need. And so just to contextualize, we are in midwinter in Australia, which is in Melbourne flowering time for Laelia anceps, and this one Not a hint of fragrance, but never mind. With a flower that beautiful, do you need to smell as well? So there we are, plant lovers. The first cab off my I've bought a flowering plant rank is this very, very, very attractive Laelia anceps, no other ID, white. Okay, let us clear this deck and move in just a little bit closer. And you can see here a fantastic Cymbidium. Yes, plant lovers, look at this Cymbidium. Now, there are Cymbidiums and there are Cymbidiums and there are lots of Cymbidiums and a huge array of hybrids. And I'm, to be honest, not that fond of many of them. I don't tend to like the Cymbidiums that are quite clustered, where the petals and sepals are quite round and large. So you have a sort of a saucer-shaped flower. Not so into them, but I am really into this shape of flower that's a bit more spidery and sort of open. I really, really love them. And so it is Cymbidium time here in Melbourne. It is midwinter, and depending on the type and the grower, they've been in bloom for a few months. So some people start to bloom into very late autumn, all the way through winter, and some hang on till spring. So it really depends. There's a fairly broad season here in Melbourne. But this one, I think, is still very closely related to its ancestor origin, which is, looking at it, most likely Cymbidium thracianum. Now that is a species orchid, species Cymbidium, and it's from that magical spot, the border of sort of Vietnam, Laos, China, that area where so many amazing orchids seem to originate. And it is described as fragrant. And in its natural habitat, the thracianum is an epiphyte, and it grows in a fair range of altitudes. So it's described as cool to warm. Here in Melbourne, most Cymbidiums are quite happy outside all year. They can take our minimums as we don't freeze. So this one, I just really, really love the colour. It's sort of, I don't know, it's like a sepia tone with these red spots on it. And it is, I think, very stylish and very elegant, and I loved it. And thracianum is supposed to smell of peaches. This has a relatively strong fragrance. It's a no ID, so I bought it from Facebook Marketplace. I'm sorry to say. So it's a no ID from a local grower, so I'm not sure what the actual hybrid name is, but it is fragrant. And I'm saying it's not an attractive fragrance to me, but you know how subjective fragrance appeal is. I'm trying to describe it. It's quite cloying and it's quite sweet. And if anything, I would say there's a hint of tuberose in there. So it's quite a perfume. And I've got this by our front door. And as you come in and out of the house, you really get a waft of the fragrance. But it is a beauty. So I was very happy to find this on Facebook Marketplace. And it is a massive specimen, and it's got lots of new growths coming. So next year we should have good spikes again. And I guess the other interesting thing is to compare the two sort of basic types of hybrid Cymbidium that you get. So this one is a large strappy plant with very large upright spikes, and that can present a bit of a problem for the home grower because they can get quite large, and I made a video about repotting one. They can become cumbersome and slightly difficult to manage as they age, perhaps like the best of us. So these larger style of Cymbidium hybrids can be a bit tricky, particularly if you don't have much space and you're perhaps not that keen on setting to with a sledgehammer to repot them. So the other type of Cymbidium, now this is my pendulous Cymbidium, as you can see there, more of a pendulous type. Now this one is a Cymbidium that I have made a video about before. Look at that, sorry, we've got all the leaves in the way. And I actually, well, I didn't lose the tag. It did have a tag, but I think a possum or something, the possums were knocking over the pots all the time and it disappeared. I think it's Sarah Jean Ice Cascade. So the thing is, as you can see, it's a relatively small plant, and these are sort of designed, I suppose, to be hung. So they do quite well in hanging baskets. And this is quite a small spike, but the older the plant gets, you can get quite long sprays of beautiful flowers. And the mass of the plant doesn't really get much bigger. It tends to stay relatively compact and have these amazing sprays. Easier to manage, easier to repot. So those are kind of the two types of Cymbidium. So depending on your space, you could perhaps make your decision thus. And although these types do well really hung up in a hanging basket or even just suspended pots, mine, as you can see, is just in a terracotta pot, and I just elevate it so you can still see the flowers, but it's not hanging up because I can't really do that here. I sort of don't have the space. Okay, next cap off our I bought a flowering orchid rank is this. Look at that Paphiopedilum. Isn't it beautiful? No ID. Look at the fabulous mottled leaves though, and a really beautiful, essentially green and white flower. And it was really because of the green and white flower that I bought it, because I don't really have any sort of greenish flowering orchids, and I just loved that. I thought it was quite subtle and low-key. Again, no ID because I bought this from a grower's private sale, which was fantastic. Whew, I actually bought a few things from him, and there's one other thing in bloom which I will show you now. So once again, often the best things you find, like this Facebook Marketplace, which I know some of us are morally opposed to, and this do come from the sort of left of field connection. So it is good to make connections within your orchid growing community. And I came to know about this guy because I joined one of my local orchid groups, and he's also a member, and so his private sale was advertised within the group. So it can be a great ulterior motive for joining clubs just to get your hands on orchids that you might otherwise not. Anyway, Paphiopedilum, nothing extraordinary about the care thus far because it takes Paph care, and I've made a few videos about that. I have a few Paphiopedilums, tricky to some degree, but anyway, very slow growing. But I have a few that I think are gearing up to bloom, so we shall see. But I'm very happy to add this quite minimalist, I think we could describe, plant to the family, and I love the mottled leaves. And mottled leaves is generally an indicator that they do prefer the lower light of the spectrum, whereas the paths with shinier, more even leaves can take a bit more light. Anyway, this one is a beauty, and I'm very happy about that. Well, okay then. The path came from a seller, and I also have something else from him. This little cutie, look at that. Now, it's got the most beautiful pink flowers, and I will come in closely to show you the whole plant, but there you are. Isn't it a dream? A dream. And quite unusual as an orchid flower type. It looks much more like the native orchids of Australia, actually, I have to say. So it is, and this one does have a tag, which helps. Calanthe cardioglossa. Can you see that? And once again, this comes from that magic spot, southern China, northern Laos, Thailand, that sort of area, varying degrees of elevation. So it's described as cool to warm, which means it's tolerant and versatile, as we all should be. But isn't it absolutely beautiful? Now, as you can see, it is deciduous. So it is blooming when it is essentially sort of in dormancy. And it's a time not to water it. Now, I haven't quite got my head around care yet, except that it's winter dormant and it's important not to water it because it can rot, like Cattleya orchids and other such things. So I am being very sparing, and I'm just misting it a lot, which is fine. And the pseudobulbs look fine, and I'm going to do a lot more work on figuring out quite how I manage this in my climate, but so far so good. The spike, as you can see, has blooms that open sequentially, and there's quite a few more to come, and it's a very delicate, lovely pink color, and I'm kind of hoping it's going to form a lovely clump, and I shall have a couple of spikes per season, and it will look absolutely beautiful. Quite delicate. The spike was really small when I bought the plant, so I wasn't really aware what it was going to do, and it's lovely, but it's I mean, it's not the most flashy of things, is it? But anyway, it's a lovely plant, and it's not taking up that much room, but anyway, unusual, hard to find. I've never seen it anywhere else, and cool to warm growing means it could stay outside all year. This is its first winter though, and I know that it was grown in an area that was heated. So I am not about to inflict our first winter on this poor little Calanthe. So inside it is, but it is downstairs where the nighttime temperature does get comparatively cool to the rest of the house. So yeah, we'll see. See if I'm brave enough to put it out all winter next year. Probably not. But watch this space, because if next year when we get leaves and new growths, I might do a care video once I've actually kept it alive and if it reblooms. So let's see how I go with this. But it's a charming little plant, and I kind of like deciduous terrestrial orchids. So this is one. Alrighty, next cab off the rank, sliding gently towards us. And this, as you can see, is a Cattleya. And it is a species Cattleya. It is Cattleya skinneri, and it's the alba type, as you can see, because it's white. Well, to be honest, Cattleyas and I perhaps aren't the best of friends. Melbourne isn't the best place in the world to be growing Cattleyas, I feel. My track record isn't great. I had a fantastic Cattleya maxima, which bloomed and it was stunning, and then it died, or I killed it. I think I know why. Anyway, then I had another maxima division, which also died, and now I have a third one, which wasn't in particularly great shape to start with, but it does have a new growth. Anyway, I also have a Cattleya seedling I've had since the dawn of time, which is the size of the Titanic, and finally has a sheath appearing, which hasn't withered and died. So maybe I'm turning the Cattleya corner. Anyway, on researching it, I thought, well, obviously the thing I should be looking for is the cooler climate Cattleyas. So ones that are more versatile in terms of their temperature capacity to thrive. And Skinneri is one of those. So it can take relatively cool temperatures. It's a cool to warm grower, because it is found at relatively, in fact, quite high elevation. So hence it can take cool nighttime winter minimums. And like many fabulous orchids, it's found in that band of Central America, so southern Mexico, sort of Costa Rica around there, that central bit. Again, one of those amazing orchid hotspots. And a lot of that is due to that variety of altitudes. Apparently, wherever you have altitude in the tropics, you tend to have amazing biodiversity. So there we are, Cattleya skinneri. It was in bud when I bought it, and they've opened, so that's the first good thing, isn't it? Let's see how we go. Now, no sign of a new growth yet. This is a division, so that's going to be the first test of my ability to look after you, new growths. Anyway, we'll see how we go. And actually, I got this fabulous Cattleya from eBay. And because it's come from a much warmer place, I am keeping it indoors so that it can acclimatize. So in spring, I will take it outside, and then I will test it through winter, keeping it relatively dry in winter. But anyway, stunning, really stunning flower, and not an ounce of fragrance. There we are, in a shallow pot with the usual kind of media, which is a mixture of large and medium bark with perlite, I presume I can see. Bit of a skanky pot, I have to say. Look at that. So that pot's going to go, but not right this second, because it's as happy as it needs to be. So I'm actually tempering my urge to repot everything the minute I get it, because it's often inappropriate timing, as this is in bloom and it's midwinter. But also, the plant doesn't really need it, and these are grown by good growers, and I am quite happy with the way that it's been potted. So I'm just going to have to deal with the unfortunate ugliness of this sun-damaged, unpleasant plastic pot for the foreseeable future, until the orchid needs repotting. So maybe a year's time. We'll see how it goes anyway. You know, I'm growing, I'm maturing, I'm becoming so tolerant in my old age. Okay, time to move Cattleya skinneri alba off and enter stage left. Yes, it is Oncidium Alliance time. Look at the size of these flowers. I mean, goodness me, it is literally the size of my palm. Anyway, I was in my favorite nursery, as you do, just hanging out. No intention of buying anything, and I saw this. Now, perhaps like many of us, you know, I've kind of got a lot of Oncidium Alliance, those sort of mega hybrids of different things, Wilsonara, blah, blah, blah. But plant lovers, I saw the size of this bloom and thought, oh my goodness, you know what? Sometimes size matters. And so here it is. It's no ID. So one of the things about this particular nursery is that the grower they get them from just puts Oncidium on all the tags, so regardless of what it is. And they are all sort of Oncidium Alliance hybrid types of varying degrees. That's where I found my Laelia actually. It was untagged with a dead flower spike, so I had no idea what it was. and a couple of others that I've made films about actually. So it just takes a while to figure out what it might be. And to be honest, I haven't started to look for this flower, but there are lots of those hybrid types that have particularly large flowers. Some of the high-low Oncidium types have really big flowers. So I'll just stalk some of the growers' websites around the world and see if I can find the flower. But it is the most beautiful sort of claret colour with these splashes of gold in the middle there. Really rich and velvety and absolutely extraordinary. And again, the flower spike on this one is probably 80 centimetres tall, you know, 2.5, 3 feet. Huge! So I guess one has to be prepared for that. It's going to be a big baby, not unlike the Laelia anceps that we spoke about earlier. Anyway, I literally only bought this because of the size of the flower. It is unlike anything I have, and the colour is quite magnificent. No fragrance. So, you know, some Oncidiums do, but this one doesn't. But who cares? It is a stunning plant of massive proportions, and I am just really happy with that. And plant lovers, another cheeky little plant I forgot to film in my other filming of my new plants that are in bloom is this one. Look at that. Look at the colour of those flowers. Doesn't that make your heart sing? I love lilac, lavender, mauve, whatever we're going to call it. Love. And this little baby is, so you see, two names here, but the one at the bottom, Epidendrum centropetalum, is, I think, now the accepted name. You know how taxonomists like to move things around, so the bottom one is the right name. So an epidendrum of sorts. Now, I am here to tell you, and please forgive me, that I don't love epidendrums. And I think perhaps because here in Australia, they're pretty common and almost grow as weeds in a lot of parts of the country. And even here in Melbourne, which is temperate, certainly not subtropical, they grow incredibly well in pots outdoors, kind of just left to their own devices. So it's an orchid type that doesn't really fill me with excitement. I've got quite a few at the back, and they're bits that broke off other people's or things I've rescued, and they do their thing fine. But this one, this has a very different flower shape and a very different growth habit, and the most beautiful color, which is why I was drawn to it. So it's from literally Central America, Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua. So the very narrowest bit of Central America is where it's from. Fairly wide range of altitudes. So it is a cool grower. So it's a mountain plant. It grows in forests that are a mix of deciduous and non-deciduous, which means it will get probably more sunlight in winter than in summer. And it does have apparently a slightly drier winter, autumn, winter, and then things ramp up in spring, summer, but not one to let dry out, because as you can see, it's very sort of grassy. It has these very stemmy stems. So as you can see though, it doesn't really have pseudobulbs. Well, it doesn't. It has stems. So not one to let dry out completely, but as you can see, really fleshy epiphytic roots, so something that can absorb lots of moisture and cling to the side of trees, which is where it lives. And the older canes, as you can see, are deciduous. So there we are. I just love, love, love that colour. And as it's described as cool, and it's a sort of a moist mountain plant, I am wondering if I dare grow it outside all year. Now it's winter at the moment and I just received it, and I think that's too much of a shock for something for its first winter. So I'm going to keep it indoors, but downstairs. So if you watched my epic grow space video, it's at the bottom of the stairs. So it gets plenty of filtered light, quite bright indirect light in fact, but it does get quite chilly, comparatively chilly at night, as opposed to upstairs, which is usually quite a few degrees warmer. So cooler orchids like it downstairs, so things like Miltoniopsis. And I'm hoping that this one, well it is, look, it's as happy as Larry, blooming away downstairs. So the other thing is, perhaps you can see, you see this aerial root here? Well, that is a keiki that has appeared, and apparently very typical of this plant that it produces keikis from nodes. So what I shall do, I think, plant lovers, is as soon as this keiki is old enough, I will pot it on and I will develop two plants. One I will keep indoors and one I will keep outdoors. And in a year's time, we might do a follow-up video and see who fared best. So there we are, plant lovers, a little 101 of the new plants I've been buying that are in flower. You know, sometimes I feel like a bit of a cheat buying things in bloom, but Cymbidiums I know how to look after. Other things, no, they will take a year, perhaps more, to figure out the optimum care. So watch this space and we can see what happens. But buying plants in flower obviously means that you know what the plant's going to look like and you haven't got to wait years and years and years. So generally in Melbourne, the only option I have is to buy seedlings of the more unusual type of orchids, or in certain nurseries you'll find Oncidium types, but a fairly limited bandwidth of the type that's available. So to get anything unusual tends to need to be a seedling, and as we know, that can take years before they mature and bloom if you get it right and if you don't kill it. So sometimes we all just need the instant gratification of a flowering sized plant, and I have satisfied that itch. So plant lovers, thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for finding me. I do post every week, so if my conditions are like yours, do hit subscribe and you can follow my continuing journey, learning lots, killing lots, but a lot is still surviving. And a couple of things are coming into spike, which is really exciting and a bit of a first. So just have to keep my fingers crossed and make sure that that progresses. But anyway, watch this space for some things that I've never been able to bloom before, which look like they're going to, and in my climate, quite tricky to manage. So there's a teaser for you. It's like, who killed JR? Cliffhanger. Anyway, thank you very much for finding me. Thank you for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making this one because it's about all these new beauties in my life. Anyway, plant lovers, take care wherever you are. I hope life is treating you well, that your flowers are blooming and all is good in the world, even though it's not, but flowers make you happy. I look forward to seeing you next week.